Be me. 19-year-old college freshman studying sociology, attending liberal arts college in California, super into feminist theory and social justice. Take Women and Gender Studies 101 first semester. Professor is this intense woman with short purple hair. Talks about patriarchy and systemic oppression every class. Completely opens my eyes to how society works. Feel like I finally understand everything wrong with the world. Join campus feminist collective called Voices Rising. We organize protests and awareness campaigns, mostly focus on reproductive rights and campus sexual assault. Feel like we are doing important activist work. Big thing we push for is free menstrual products in all bathrooms, including men's bathrooms because trans men exist. Administration keeps refusing saying budget constraints. We call it period poverty and a form of gender oppression. Organize sit-in at admin building demanding free tampons and pads. About 30 of us camp out in lobby for 3 days, chanting slogans about bodily autonomy. Local news even covers it. Feel powerful and righteous. Admin finally agrees to install dispensers in all bathrooms. Huge victory for our movement. Throw celebration party at Feminist House off campus. Everyone congratulating each other on dismantling patriarchy. Second semester, take intersectional feminism seminar. Professor explains how all oppression is connected. Capitalism, racism, sexism, all part of same system. Start seeing everything through intersectional lens. Roommate Sophie is also super into activism. We stay up late discussing theory and planning actions. Our dorm room has feminist posters covering every wall. Rosie the Riveter, Frida Kahlo, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Keep stack of zines about radical feminism on desk. Big issue on campus is lack of women in STEM programs. Only like 20% of engineering students are women. Obviously result of systemic sexism and hostile environment. Decide we need to do something about this. Voices Rising organizes campaign to increase women in STEM. Demand university implement affirmative action for admissions. Also want mandatory diversity training for engineering faculty. Create petition that gets 800 signatures. Administration says they are committed to diversity, but cannot implement gender quotas for legal reasons. We say this is just excuse to maintain male dominance. Organize another protest outside engineering building. Make signs saying things like STEM is for everyone, and sexism has no place in science. Engineering students mostly ignore us. Some guys laugh and take photos. Makes me angry how dismissive they are. One guy stops to argue with us, says gender disparity has nothing to do with discrimination, claims women just choose other fields more often. I tell him that is exactly what internalized misogyny looks like. He asks if I have considered women and men might have different interests. Call him a biological essentialist. Sophie backs me up, saying his argument is patriarchal propaganda. He rolls his eyes and walks away. Add him to mental list of campus sexists. Junior year, join campus newspaper as opinion columnist. Write weekly pieces about feminist issues, covering everything from rape culture to microaggressions. Get lots of hate comments, but also supportive messages. Feel like I am amplifying marginalized voices. Write article about how university career fair is heteronormative. All the corporate recruiters assume traditional gender presentations. Argue this creates hostile environment for non-binary students. Piece gets shared widely on social media. Some people call it brilliant critique. Others say I am reaching and making up problems. Do not care what critics think. They are usually men who benefit from existing power structures. Their defensiveness proves I am onto something real. keep writing more provocative pieces. Senior year, decide to do honors thesis on workplace feminism. Want to research how women experience professional environments, specifically looking at gender discrimination in male-dominated fields. Thesis advisor is supportive of my activist approach to scholarship. Thesis argues that any workplace gender disparity proves discrimination. If a field has fewer women, it must be due to hostile culture. Only way to achieve equality is mandatory gender parity. Pepper thesis with terms like heteropatriarchy and cis-heteronormativity. Defend thesis in front of faculty committee. Presentation goes well, I think. One older male professor asks uncomfortable questions. Wants to know if I considered alternative explanations for gender gaps. Tell him that question itself reveals his implicit bias. He looks annoyed, but does not push back. Pass thesis defense with honors. Feel validated that my feminist analysis is academically rigorous, graduate with degree in sociology, and women's studies minor. Move back home to suburban Ohio after graduation. Plan to take few months off before applying to grad schools. Want to get PhD in gender studies eventually. Become professor and train next generation of feminists. Living with parents temporarily while job searching. They are supportive, but sometimes seem confused by my politics. Mom keeps asking why I am so angry all the time. Try to explain about systemic oppression. She just nods and changes subject. Applying to nonprofit jobs in advocacy and activism. Want to work for women's rights organization. Preferably something focused on workplace equality. Send out maybe 50 applications over 2 months. Getting rejected from most positions. When I get interviews, they seem to go okay. But then, never hear back. Starting to get frustrated with process. Finally, get job offer from local community center. Position is administrative assistant in programs department. Not exactly what I wanted, but need to start somewhere. Pay is $32,000 per year. Barely enough to afford apartment, but take the job. Start working at community center. Mostly doing scheduling and data entry. Some light outreach coordination. Thought there would be more actual advocacy work. Turns out to be mostly boring office tasks. Co-workers are mix of ages and backgrounds. Director of programs is woman named Patricia. She is like 50 years old, very professional. Seems nice enough, but kind of corporate. Couple months into job, Patricia announces new initiative. Community Center getting grant to run youth mentorship program. Pairing at-risk teens with adult mentors in community. Supposed to focus on career readiness and life skills. Patricia asks me to help coordinate mentor recruitment. Need to find like 40 adults willing to volunteer. Create flyers and social media posts advertising program. Emphasize need for diverse mentors to reflect community. Mentorship program launches with orientation for new volunteers. I help run the training session. Teaching mentors about youth development and boundaries. Also includes section on cultural competency and implicit bias. One of volunteers is guy named Marcus. He is software engineer at tech company downtown. Black guy, probably early 30s. Seems genuinely excited about mentoring. Another volunteer is woman named Deborah. She is accountant at local firm. White woman, maybe late 40s. Talks about wanting to give back to community. We match mentors with teens based on interests and availability. My role is to coordinate schedules and check in on matches. Make sure mentors are showing up and relationships are developing. Actually, kind of enjoy this part of the job. 3 months into program, Patricia asks me to collect feedback, send surveys to mentors asking about their experience. Most responses are positive. people saying they enjoy spending time with their mentees. Notice something interesting in the data, though. Male mentors report spending way more time with mentees, like twice as many hours per month on average. Female mentors mostly stick to minimum required commitment. Mention this pattern to Patricia during staff meeting. She finds it interesting and asks me to dig deeper. Conduct follow-up interviews with several mentors. Want to understand what explains the gender difference? Talk to Marcus, the software engineer, first. He is spending like 12 hours per month with his mentee. Takes kid to basketball games, helps with homework. Even brought him to his office to see tech workplace. Clearly very invested in the relationship. Ask him why he dedicates so much time. Says his mentee reminds him of himself at that age. Grew up without father figure and struggled. Wants to provide support he wishes he had gotten. Getting kind of emotional talking about it. Interview Deborah, the accountant, next. She is doing exactly the required 4 hours per month. Meets her mentee at coffee shop twice a month for 2 hours. Nice conversations, but not going above and beyond. Seems to view it more as volunteer obligation. Ask why she does not spend more time. She laughs and says she barely has time for required meetings. Works 50 hours per week, plus has family responsibilities. Husband and 2 teenage kids at home. Volunteering is squeezed into already packed schedule. Interview like 6 more mentors. Pattern holds pretty consistently. Men, especially single guys, going way beyond minimum. Women, especially mothers, doing bare minimum required. Start forming theory about what this means. Obviously, this reflects gendered expectations around labor. Women already doing disproportionate domestic and emotional work, so they have less capacity for additional volunteering. Men have more. Free time because they are not burdened by household labor. Therefore, able to invest more energy in mentorship. This must be another example of how patriarchy shapes everything. Write up analysis for Patricia, focusing on gender inequality angle. Argue that program unintentionally relies on male volunteers because women are already carrying invisible labor burdens. Recommend we reduce time requirements to make program more equitable. Patricia reads my report and looks thoughtful. Schedules meeting to discuss findings. I come in ready to talk about structural sexism. She starts by thanking me for thorough analysis, then says she has some additional thoughts. Asks if I considered other explanations for pattern. Here we go with the alternative explanations again. Patricia points out something I had not focused on. Most of male mentors who volunteer extra time are single. Most of female mentors are married with kids. Maybe the difference is not about gender, but about family status. She pulls up data showing single women volunteers. They spend just as much time as single men. Married men with kids volunteer same amount as married women. The real predictor is whether someone has family obligations. Feel kind of defensive hearing this. Argue that family obligations themselves are gendered. Women do more child care and housework than men, so family status and gender are interconnected. Patricia agrees that is true in general, but says in this specific case, both parents seem equally busy. The married male mentors also cite family commitments. The single female mentors also go above and beyond. Seems like the pattern is really about available time, not gender. Leave meeting feeling confused and kind of frustrated. Spent weeks developing feminist analysis of the data. Turns out, simpler explanation fits better. People with more free time volunteer more, regardless of gender. Talked to Sophie on phone that night. She is in grad school in Boston studying critical theory. Tell her about the mentorship program findings. Expect her to validate my intersectional interpretation. She listens and then asks some questions, points out that my analysis assumed gender was primary factor, but maybe I was seeing patterns that confirmed my expectations. Says this is called confirmation bias. Getting annoyed now. Tell her I am doing materialist feminist analysis, not just making up patterns. She says that is fair, but maybe I should consider multiple variables. Hang up feeling irritated. Thought Sophie would understand. She used to be more supportive of my activist work. Grad school might be making her too academic and detached. Next few months, continue coordinating mentorship program. Trying to stop thinking about the gender data thing. Focus on practical tasks like scheduling and communication. Program is going pretty well overall. Patricia asks me to help with program evaluation. Need to measure impact on the teens who participate. Comparing their outcomes to similar kids not in program. Looking at grades, attendance, behavioral referrals. Spend couple weeks collecting and analyzing data. Results are honestly pretty impressive. Mentored kids showing improvement across multiple measures, especially the ones with most engaged mentors. Notice that teens matched with high-commitment mentors do best, the ones whose mentors spend 10+ hours per month. Show biggest gains in grades and attendance. Kids with minimum commitment mentors show smaller effects. This means mentor gender does correlate with outcomes, because male mentors on average spend more time. Their mentees on average show better results. So in a way, my original feminist concern was valid. Present findings to Patricia excitedly. Explain that gender gap in volunteer time creates outcome gap. We need to address this to serve all teens equally. Recommend requiring all mentors to commit 10 hours minimum. Patricia listens, but then points out problem with my logic. Mentor time and outcomes are correlated, but not caused by gender. High commitment is what matters regardless of mentor gender. Female mentors who spend 10 hours get same results as male mentors. She suggests instead of increasing requirements for everyone, we recruit more volunteers who have capacity for high engagement. Target single people and empty nesters of any gender. Focus on who has time rather than trying to mandate equal outcomes. Realize she is right, but feels bad to admit it. My feminist framework led me to focus on gender, when the real issue is time availability. Gender is correlated, but not causal. Start questioning how I analyze other social issues. Do I always assume gender is primary explanation, even when other factors might be more relevant? This is uncomfortable realization. Few months later, Patricia offers me new role. Program coordinator position focused on volunteer recruitment. Would mean small raise and more responsibility. Also would involve working closely with community partners. Accept the position, excited for new challenge. Part of job is visiting local businesses to recruit mentors. Talking to HR departments about employee volunteer programs. Some companies give workers paid time off for volunteering. Visit tech company where Marcus works. Meet with their head of corporate social responsibility. Woman named Jennifer, probably late 30s. She is interested in getting more employees involved as mentors. Jennifer asks about time commitment. Explain program asks for minimum 4 hours per month. But most effective mentors invest 10 or more hours. She looks concerned about that number. Says tech industry has serious work-life balance problems. Employees already working 60-hour weeks. Company trying to reduce burnout, not add more obligations. Can only support volunteer programs with realistic time requirements. Mention that some of their employees, like Marcus, do find time. She laughs and says, Marcus is unique case. He is single, no kids, and honestly kind of workaholic. Uses volunteering as social outlet. Most employees have families and outside obligations. Ask if she notices gender differences in who volunteers. She thinks about it and says, "Not really." Main factor is life stage and family status. Junior employees with no kids tend to volunteer most, regardless of whether they are men or women. Leave meeting thinking about what she said. Starting to see pattern in what I am hearing. Everyone keeps pointing to same explanation. Family obligations and free time matter more than gender. That night, do some research on volunteer patterns. Read academic studies on gender and civic engagement. Turns out literature is mixed on this. Some studies show women volunteer more. Others show men volunteer more. Depends heavily on type of volunteering and how you measure it. Women do more informal caregiving and community support. Men do more formal organizational volunteering like coaching. Both genders contribute, but in different ways. Simplistic gender gap narrative does not capture complexity. Also read about how family status affects volunteering. Parents of young children volunteer less overall. Empty nesters volunteer more. Pattern holds for both mothers and fathers. Realize my undergraduate feminist training gave me hammer, so I kept seeing every problem as nail. Gender lens is useful, but not sufficient for every analysis. Sometimes other factors are more explanatory. Year into coordinator job, Patricia announces she is retiring. Community center doing search for new programs. Director encourages me to apply even though I am pretty young. Says I have shown good growth and leadership potential. Decide to apply figuring I probably will not get it. Put together, application emphasizing program management experience. Get called for interview with hiring committee. Includes board members and executive director. Interview goes okay, I think. They ask about my approach to program development. Talk about importance of evidence-based practices. Using data to understand what actually works, not just what sounds good. One board member asks about my philosophy on equity and inclusion. Standard question for nonprofit job. Launch into response about intersectionality and systemic oppression. Talk about how all programs must center marginalized voices. Need to actively dismantle white supremacy and patriarchy. Pepper response with academic jargon from college courses. Feel pretty good about demonstrating social justice commitment. Notice executive director looks slightly concerned. She asks follow-up about how I balance advocacy with program effectiveness. Caught off guard by question. Say something vague about how justice and effectiveness are same thing. Do not get the job. They hire woman named Teresa, who has 15 years experience. Feel disappointed but not totally surprised. Probably was not realistic for me to get director role at 24. Teresa starts, and I meet with her to discuss programs. She is Latina woman, maybe late 30s. Has background in youth development and nonprofit management. Seems competent and thoughtful. She wants to review all existing programs, including mentorship. Asks me to present data on outcomes and cost effectiveness. Put together presentation showing impact metrics. Teens in program improve grades by average of half-letter grade. Teresa is impressed by results. Asks questions about what makes programs successful. Explain that mentor commitment level is biggest predictor. High engagement mentors produce best outcomes. She asks what determines mentor engagement. Describe pattern 1. Found about family status and available time. Single volunteers and empty nesters tend to be most active. People with young kids struggle to meet even minimum requirements. Teresa nods and asks if we have considered that in recruitment. Explain Patricia suggested targeting people with more availability. But we have not really changed our approach yet, still just doing general recruitment. She suggests we get more strategic about volunteer pipeline. Partner with organizations where we can reach target demographics. Senior centers for retirees, young professional groups for single people. Focus energy where we are most likely to find committed volunteers. Makes total sense, but feels weird. Like we are discriminating based on family status. Say something about wanting diverse volunteer base. She says, of course, but also need to be practical about capacity. Implement new targeted recruitment strategy over next few months. Visit Rotary clubs and alumni associations. Partner with young professionals network in city. Attendance at volunteer orientations increases. New volunteers do tend to skew toward demographics Teresa identified. More retirees and young single professionals. Fewer parents of young children. Mentor engagement levels go up across the board. 6 months later, program evaluation shows even better outcomes. Average mentee grade improvement now up to full letter grade. Attendance rates improving significantly. Teens reporting stronger relationships with mentors. Teresa congratulates me on successful program expansion. Says strategic recruitment made real difference. Focusing on volunteer capacity rather than checking diversity boxes. Produced better results for the kids we serve. Feel good about impact, but also conflicted. My college training emphasized representation above all else. Make sure volunteer base reflects community demographics. But that approach was not actually producing best outcomes. Prioritizing effectiveness over symbolic diversity feels wrong somehow. Like I am betraying my activist values, but the teens in program are thriving. Hard to argue with results. Talk to old sociology professor on phone. She was one of my favorites in college. Explain dilemma about effectiveness versus representation. Expect her to validate my concerns about diversity. She listens and then surprises me. Says feminist praxis requires examining what actually helps people, not just performing ideological purity. If strategic recruitment serves kids better, that is feminist action. Asks if I have read any recent critiques of academic feminism. Some scholars arguing theory became disconnected from material reality, focusing on symbolic representation while ignoring practical outcomes. Suggests I read some of this literature. Spend next few weeks reading critical perspectives. Scholars questioning whether identity politics helps or hurts justice movements. Research showing diversity initiatives often fail to produce real change. Arguments that focusing on representation distracts from material concerns. Mind kind of blown by this stuff. No one assigned these readings in college. Always assumed more representation automatically meant more justice. Turns out relationship is much more complicated. Think back to college activism around STEM gender gaps. We demanded more women in engineering programs, but never asked whether women wanted to be engineers, or what structural barriers might exist beyond discrimination. Maybe lower enrollment reflected different interests or priorities. Maybe women choosing other fields was not evidence of oppression. Maybe trying to force 50-50 gender ratio was misguided. Remember guy at protest who suggested women and men have different interests? I called him biological essentialist. But what if he was partially right? Not because of biology, but because of socialized preferences. My whole framework was built on assumption that unequal outcomes prove discrimination. Any gender disparity must result from sexism. Only solution is forced parity through quotas and mandates. But mentorship program taught me different lesson. Disparate outcomes can have multiple causes. Addressing them requires understanding actual mechanisms, not just assuming oppression explains everything. Start noticing this pattern in other areas. Campus Feminist Collective used to complain about emotional labor. Women forced to do disproportionate emotional work in relationships. Men benefiting from female emotional caretaking. But in mentorship program, men were doing more emotional labor, building deep relationships with troubled teens, providing emotional support and guidance. Women with family obligations could not invest same energy. Maybe emotional labor distribution is not primarily about gender. Maybe it is about who has capacity and how labor is valued. Men do less emotional labor in romantic relationships, but might do more in other contexts. My feminist theory treated gender as master explanation, everything traced back to patriarchy and male dominance. But real world keeps showing me more complex picture. Multiple factors interact in ways theory did not predict. Now 26 and still working at community center. Teresa promoted me to assistant director role, partly because program results have been strong. Also because she says I have grown a lot as practitioner. Still identify as feminist and care about gender justice. But understanding of what that means has shifted. Less interested in representation metrics. More focused on what actually improves people's material conditions. College me would probably think I sold out. Abandoned radical politics for respectability. Became complicit in systems of oppression. Prioritized reform over revolution. But serving actual teens in struggling community. Watching them graduate high school because mentor believed in them. Seeing single moms get childcare support through our programs. This feels more meaningful than symbolic campus activism. Sometimes miss certainty of college activism. We knew exactly who the villains were. Patriarchy, capitalism, white supremacy. All problems traced to those systems. Real world is messier than that. Good people trying to help sometimes make things worse. Simplistic solutions often fail. Need to constantly evaluate what works versus what feels righteous. Looking back at thesis about workplace feminism, argued any gender disparity proves discrimination. Only solution is mandatory parity. Seems so naive now. Workplace gender gaps probably do reflect some discrimination, but also reflect differences in preferences, constraints, and opportunities. Addressing them requires nuanced understanding, not blanket assumptions about cause and effect. Think about all the think pieces I wrote in college newspaper, calling out microaggressions and problematic language, demanding trigger warnings and safe spaces. Some of that was probably useful, but some was probably performative nonsense. One article I wrote called Career Fair Heteronormative, because recruiters assumed traditional gender presentations, claimed this harmed non-binary students. Did I ever actually talk to non-binary students about their experience? Probably just projected my theoretical framework onto situation, assumed I knew what marginalized people needed without actually asking them. Classic mistake of activist who prioritizes ideology over listening. Sophie comes to visit for weekend. She finished her master's and now working at think tank in D.C., doing policy research on economic inequality. We go out for drinks and catch up. Tell her about my journey from campus activist to program coordinator. How mentorship data challenged my assumptions. Learning that gender is not always primary explanation. She nods like she has gone through similar evolution. Says grad school forced her to reckon with limits of theory. Reading empirical research that contradicted activist narratives. Realizing good intentions do not guarantee good outcomes. Learning to separate what sounds good from what works. We talk about how college activism felt so certain. Righteous anger at injustice, clear sense of right and wrong. Binary thinking about oppressors and oppressed. Now everything feels more complicated. People contain multitudes. Systems have unintended effects. Solutions require experimentation, not just declaration. Sophie says she still believes in feminist goals: equal pay, reproductive rights, freedom from violence, but less sure about feminist methods, especially tendency to see everything through single lens. Agree that intersectionality was supposed to help with this, acknowledging multiple overlapping systems of oppression, but in practice often became more dogmatic, just more identity categories to police. Wonder if our generation of feminists got something wrong. We were so focused on language and representation, calling out problematic behavior and demanding symbolic change. Maybe we missed bigger structural issues. Or maybe campus activism is just different from real organizing. College feminism is performance and identity formation. Actual justice work is slower and messier, requires compromise and coalition building. Talk about whether we are still feminists, if we reject much of academic feminist framework. Sophie says she thinks so, but feminist means different thing now. Less about identifying oppression everywhere, more about expanding opportunities and reducing constraints. I agree, but also feel some loss. Miss feeling like I had answers. Certainty that I was on right side of history. Clarity about who to oppose and who to support. Now I mostly feel uncertain about things, trying to help people in small, practical ways, measuring results and adjusting approaches, admitting when I am wrong. Maybe this is just growing up, losing ideological certainty, gaining practical wisdom, understanding complexity instead of seeking simplicity. Or maybe I got co-opted by the system. Teresa and Patricia taught me to value effectiveness, but effectiveness by whose standards? Maybe I just learned to work within existing power structures. Honestly, do not know anymore. College me was wrong about a lot, but at least college me cared deeply and tried to fight. Current me is more effective, but less certain. Sometimes wonder if I should have gone to grad school, become gender studies professor like I planned, training next generation of feminist activists instead of coordinating nonprofit programs. But then I see kids in mentorship program, teens who were failing out now applying to college, single mothers getting job training through our programming, community members connecting with resources they need. This is not revolutionary, not dismantling patriarchy or overthrowing capitalism, just helping people survive and maybe thrive a little. Incremental change instead of radical transformation. College feminist me would be disappointed. Working within the system instead of destroying it. Measuring success by metrics instead of liberation. Prioritizing what works over what feels radical. But Teresa says something that sticks with me. Justice is not about performing righteousness. Justice is about reducing suffering and expanding capability. Whatever actually accomplishes that is the work. Maybe feminism does not need to explain everything. Gender matters, but so do class, family status, education, health. Understanding specific mechanisms in specific contexts, rather than applying universal theory to every situation. Mentorship program taught me this lesson. I assumed gender explained volunteer patterns, because that was lens I learned to use. But available time was more relevant variable. Does not mean gender never matters. Obviously, gender shapes life in profound ways, but not always in ways my college theory predicted. Reality is messy and multivariate. Now, when I see gender disparity somewhere, first instinct is no longer to assume discrimination. Instead, I ask what factors produce this pattern? Who is involved, and what are their constraints? What interventions might actually shift outcomes? Less satisfying than having villain to fight, but more useful for solving actual problems. Maybe this is what mature feminism looks like. Or maybe I just lost the plot. Either way, cannot go back to college certainty. Seen too much complexity. Made too many mistakes assuming I knew answers. Learned too much from being wrong. Still believe in equality and justice. Still think gender shapes life chances. Still want women to have full opportunities. Just less sure I know how to get there. Community center work continues. Programs expand and evolve. Some succeed and some fail. Keep measuring and adjusting. Couple years later, Teresa leaves for bigger nonprofit. I apply for program's director position. Get interviewed by hiring committee again. This time, get the job at 29 years old. First major decision is whether to expand mentorship program. Now serving 80 teens with consistent positive outcomes. Could double size with additional funding, but would need to maintain volunteer quality. Remember lessons from earlier recruitment challenges. Need to find volunteers with capacity for real commitment. Not just warm bodies to fill slots. Quality matters more than quantity. Develop targeted recruitment focusing on engaged volunteers. Results in less diverse volunteer base demographically, but more diverse in terms of skills and experience. And better outcomes for kids. Write report for board explaining approach. Some members question lack of demographic diversity. Ask whether we should prioritize representative volunteer base. Here we go again. Explain research on what actually produces good mentoring outcomes. Consistency, time investment, genuine relationship. Volunteers need capacity to show up regularly. Demographic matching less important than commitment. One board member pushes back, says representation matters for its own sake. Teens need to see mentors who look like them. Purely practical approach misses symbolic importance. Acknowledge this concern, but point to data. Teens with committed mentors of any background thrive. Teens with inconsistent mentors struggle. Racial or gender matching does not overcome low engagement. Suggest we focus energy on recruiting committed volunteers, while also conducting targeted outreach to diverse communities. Prioritize commitment first, but seek diversity within that, rather than diversity first and hoping for commitment. Board eventually agrees to this approach. Some members still uncomfortable with it. Feels like we are letting practicality override values. But outcomes speak for themselves. Realize this tension will never fully resolve. Balancing symbolic representation with practical effectiveness. Both matter, but sometimes pull in different directions. Leadership means making difficult trade-offs. Think about college me organizing STEM protests, demanding gender parity in engineering admissions, never considering whether that served women's interests. Assumed representation was the goal, regardless of context. Now understand, representation can be means or end. Sometimes, diverse participation advances justice. Sometimes, it is just aesthetic, without material impact. Need to know which dynamics are at play. Mentorship program diverse representation might be nice, but committed engagement is what changes lives. Prioritizing wrong metric would harm the teens we serve. Effectiveness has to come first even when it feels uncomfortable. Still identify as feminist 10 years after college. But feminism means something different now. Less about calling out oppression everywhere. More about expanding real opportunities for women. Less about performative activism. More about solving concrete problems. Less about ideological purity. More about practical coalition building. College feminism gave me values and critical lens. Taught me to notice gender dynamics, care about equality and justice, questioned systems and power structures, but also gave me rigid framework, tendency to see gender as master explanation, assumption that unequal outcomes prove discrimination, preference for symbolic over material change. Took years of practice to integrate those lessons. Keep critical awareness, but add empirical humility. Value gender analysis, but consider multiple factors. Seek justice, but measure actual outcomes. Would not say I abandoned feminism. More like I grew beyond academic version into something more grounded and practical. Less satisfying rhetorically, but more useful practically. Sometimes miss righteousness of college activism. Clear enemies and moral certainty. Revolutionary language and radical vision. Feeling of being on right side of history. Nonprofit work feels less heroic. Compromising with funders and stakeholders. Measuring success in incremental improvements. Accepting that perfect is enemy of good. But teens keep graduating. Families keep getting support. Community keeps getting stronger. Small victories that actually matter. Maybe this is what feminism looks like in practice. Not campus protests and social media activism, but showing up day after day. Trying things, measuring results, adjusting approach, helping specific people in specific ways. Or maybe I am just making excuses for abandoning radical politics, getting comfortable with status quo, letting system domesticate me. Honestly, still not sure. Probably never will be. Just keep trying to reduce suffering where I can, and learning from mistakes. That is all.